Our panel this morning has our esteemed moderator and my board member from the Upper Gunnison Water Conservancy, River Water Conservancy District. I need to get that river in there. Is John McLeod. To his left is soon to be retiring general manager for the Colorado.
This is my left. That's your
my
left.
left.
This is my
stage left. My left. You're right, John. As always, right? So on this side over here, for those of you who can see me, is Eric Kuhn. He's soon to be retiring general manager of the Colorado River Water Conservation District. And on the other side of the stage, raising his hand now, is a recently retired Mark Waggy, longtime guru and planning on water for Denver. I've learned quite a bit through many years working with Mark. And since these guys are getting ready to move on to different things in life, we thought this would be a great opportunity to capture some of their wisdom. So with that, John, I'm going to turn it over to you, and let's get started.
Well, as the moderator, Doug didn't leave much for me to say, but as the program reflects, we have truly two of the most gifted water leaders in Colorado here on the stage today. And we've worked it out a little bit so that Eric is going to begin the conversation by doing a little reminiscing about his 30-plus years in water planning and water negotiating on behalf of the West Slope, but also Colorado. And then Mark is going to look into the future a little bit and use the benefit of his 30 years of experience to offer some ideas and suggestions on how we can move into the future. So this is a great opportunity for all of us to listen and learn. So Eric, go ahead.
Thank you. Yeah, well, what I wanted to do when I had this invitation was kind of go back to the future, if you might want to say. Because right now we're in the middle of the Colorado Water planning process. We have roundtables, we have an IBCC, we have an active Colorado Water Conservation Board. We're doing SWASI 2017 now, or is it 2018 yet?
2018, most likely.
2018, most likely, okay. But this isn't our first rodeo in doing this, and I know there are a number of us in the audience that were involved in this in the early 1980s. So as I was cleaning out my office, I went through a number of things, and I found some interesting things that we were talking about back in 1983. Now, to back the clock up to the winter of 1983, of course, I think that was John Elway's. He'd already had one season, but he was a backup quarterback that first season. And anyway, 34 years later, I'm amazed at how things have both changed and how they've really very much the same. So my talk is how the 1983 West Slope and environmental proposals shaped Colorado's water future. And let me talk a little bit about the players. The Governor's Metropolitan Water Roundtable, it was developed in 1982. It was convened in 1982. And its purpose was to solve the Front Range's impending water problems. And Governor Lamb, of course, asked and got everybody involved in this, including the West Slope. And what was on the table at the time was Denver Water and the metropolitan water providers wanted to move forward on Two Forks Reservoir. Two Forks Reservoir, I'll have a map up here in a second, but it's located on the east slope. A 1 million acre foot reservoir, a very large one. I think it was a very tall dam, thin arch dam, beautiful dam for the civil engineers out there that find beauty in dams. I'm one of them. And it would store about 1 million acre feet. Had a firm yield of about 100,000 acre feet with a little magic asterisk under the firm yield that said subject to removal of downstream calls. So we really never did figure out what the magic asterisk meant other than it was 100,000 acre feet if perhaps Green Mountain, Shoshone, and the Grand Valley didn't exist. So that was the idea. It was primarily a trans-mountain diversion. And of course, it was very divisive at the time. Another project that was being developed at that time in the early 80s was the Homestake 2 project. And Homestake 2, Homestake 1 had already been built up on the headwaters of the Eagle River. Homestake 2 would tunnel underneath an existing wilderness area, tap into another number of creeks, and essentially expand the yield of the Homestake 2 project. Because it had an impact to the wilderness, it was highly controversial, especially in that Vail area. All right, so those are some of the players. Now, the metropolitan water users, of course, those were the ones that would use the contract with Denver to use the Two Forks water. And to get West Slope input, the Metropolitan Water Roundtable had a West Slope arm, if you want to call it, and that was called the West Slope Advisory Council. And it also had an environmental arm, which was the Colorado Environmental Coalition. Now, what the Front Range wanted at the time was Denver was looking for a Williams Fork extension project up in the headwaters of the Williams Fork. Colorado Springs and Aurora wanted the Homestake 2 project. The Front Range wanted Two Forks Reservoir, but there was a little complication to Two Forks Reservoir. It was Two Forks Reservoir and East Gore, Two Forks Reservoir and East Gore and Eagle Piney, and then Two Forks Reservoir, East Gore, Eagle Piney, Eagle, Colorado, and Straight Creek. So Two Forks was essentially going to be the collection point for a number of diversions that sort of was like a big spider that reached out into the West Slope. And in reality, I think they would have been satisfied with just Two Forks, but the plans, because Denver Water had water rights for all of these, the plans were to go much bigger ultimately than just Two Forks. What the West Slope and the Environmental Coalition offered, and the way this process worked was after the plenary session of the Roundtable in 1982, or several plenary sessions, the West Slope went off and then convened a number of meetings of its West Slope Water Advisory Council. The environmental community went off and started doing some of their own studies. And our goal was to propose an alternative to Two Forks. That I did one of the first drafts, and Mark Waggy wanted me to make sure that I give the right attribution. The next cut was taken by an attorney, a young attorney on the West Slope, and it became sort of the guts of the proposal, and that attorney was Jim Lockhead. We got agreement, and then we went to Ed Marston, who was for a long time the publisher of the High Country News, is now retired, but he was on the West Slope Advisory Council, and he sort of became our scrivener. So he wrote up the proposal. At the time, High Country News was still in Wyoming. Ed Marston's paper was the North Fork Times. So that's sort of how the process went, and over a period of about 4 months, we put together a proposal. And we presented that in Boulder, I think it was the Millennium Harvest House there in late March of 1983. And what we proposed instead of Two Forks was that we would support gross reservoir enlargement by 70,000 acre feet, a Green Mountain exchange project. By Green Mountain exchange project, we meant a pipeline from Green Mountain Reservoir back to Dillon Reservoir, coupled with a replacement reservoir to replace the functions of Green Mountain somewhere else on the West Slope, most likely the Walcott site. Or an alternative, which was be a 200 to 300,000 acre foot reservoir on the South Platte, a small Two Forks, it was called Esterbrook at the time. We also suggested trade storage, in other words, that the West Slope had future uses, and those weren't in place yet, and this trade storage would essentially be, the concept would be where the East Slope would build storage on the West Slope, and once these other projects were developed, that trade storage would be returned to the West Slope as a West Slope source of water supply. And then very significantly, Grand and Summit counties and Eagle counties wanted protections for West Slope streams and water quality. They wanted a small amount of water for growth in the headwaters. Those have really been implemented primarily through the Windy Gap, now the Windy Gap IGA, the CRCA, Colorado River Cooperative Agreement, and a number of other agreements that we entered into in the 90s. Plus, we wanted advanced conservation and reuse. That was one of the fundamental concepts of what the West Slope wanted. And ironically, the target that everyone was looking for in 1983 was getting the Front Range below 190, yes, 190 gallons per person per day. Denver was very, very resistant. They thought 190 would be too difficult to get to, but I think they agreed to it as a target. In fact, that target became a part of the foothills stipulation that Denver ultimately assigned. But where are we today now, 130 or so? You can see when 190 was considered too difficult 30 years ago, and now we're 50% below that on the Front Range. So there's a little map that shows you the places. There's Denver, there's Two Forks, see if I can, well, you can see Two Forks up there on the Platte, Roberts Tunnel, and then you can see essentially the Denver's collection system would ultimately reach out as far as Walcott Reservoir. So big impacts at the time. Multiple, in today's dollars, probably $20 billion worth of projects, about half the cost of the Colorado Water Plan. So, all right, 34 years later, where are we? Well, there's no Two Forks, and I'm saying not even one fork. Why is it one fork? Well, one fork was serious. One fork was our proposal. That was Estabrook Reservoir, which was going to be on the North Fork of the South Platte at a dam site for up to 200,000 to 300,000 acre feet. And I didn't mention when we made our presentation and the Environmental Caucus made their presentation, and I had been talking to them, it turned out they were almost identical. The West Slopes proposal and the Environmental Coalition proposal were almost identical. The Environmental Coalition was a little more focused on a one fork reservoir, and they were a little skeptical of the Green Mountain pumpback. So ultimately, when we combined those about 6 months later, we sort of dropped the Green Mountain Exchange and focused on the small Two Forks Reservoir. But 34 years later, as you know, Two Forks was vetoed by the Bush administration, first Bush administration. We don't have a home stake 2, but we're looking at alternatives under the Eagle River MOU, the 1998 Eagle River MOU. Gross Reservoir, which everyone agreed could move forward in 1983. I think it might get its permits in 2018 or 2019. So what, 36 years later? And there's a lot of water available, quite frankly, due to the good efforts of Denver Water, Northern Water, and others. There is water available under the system conservation agreements, the CRCA and the Clinton Reservoir Agreement for the headwaters. And there's a huge variety of programs now, many of them associated with the recovery program that protect flows on the West Slope. And more. Wolford Mountain Reservoir and Clinton Reservoirs became that trade storage. We have the WISE project now. We didn't call it the WISE project, but included in both the environmental and the West Slope proposals were a concept of moving water, moving return flows from essentially north of Denver back higher up on the Platte and reusing them. The East Score, Eagle Piney, Eagle Colorado projects are now good trivia questions. The water rights no longer exist, and I think there's only maybe a few of us that know much about the trivia. And I think most importantly, and I think it's something that we really should be proud of, is that Denver, and I say Denver, it's the big Denver, is now serving almost twice as many people with really about the same amount of water that they were serving in 1983. So that's really a major effort. So with that, I will simply say we implemented some of that in a 1986 agreement, and I'm reading from the High Country News, and I'll end it with the initial describing this 1986 agreement by Ez Marsden. He says, It's an exaggeration to compare the recent agreement signed by the 3 Colorado water agencies, that was the River District, Northern Water, and Denver Water, to the Treaty of Versailles, but it is not much of an exaggeration.
Thanks, Eric. We're going to hold the questions until both of them have completed their talk. So, Mark, take us into the future.
Sure. Well, I thought that was very fascinating to learn from Eric on that. I started a little bit later. I started at Denver Water in 1986 and really worked on the most of the post-Two Forks projects that Eric talked about. I think it's really interesting to see how things turned out. I don't know if we got my sound on, but it's not on. It's not doing
There you
well.
go.
Yeah. Try a little closer. Does that help?
This is a
Okay.
backup too.
Okay. Is that working? Okay. The outcomes are probably not what many of us expected, but the world changed a lot, and I think the outcomes were quite favorable. Okay? Let's do it.
Here we go.
Okay.
It's on.
It's on. Okay, here we go. I think the outcomes were not what many people expected, but the world changed a lot, and I think really they were pretty favorable. And we've had a period of really where we've worked really hard to expand the water resources pie we have, and we've had a long period of largely meeting a lot of the needs that we have in the water business. What I want to talk to you about is sort of the planning side of the water business and how Denver Water has learned over the last 30 years from the changes that have gone on, and how Denver Water is trying to apply that to improve its long-range planning. And I have to add a disclaimer that these are my own opinions. I'm free to talk about what I want to now that I'm retired. These aren't necessarily Denver Water's opinions. But Eric's right. Back when I started in 1986, our water plan was to just keep expanding those tentacles out at Denver Water to meet these projections of a really steep demand curve. And then that crown jewel, Two Forks, which was going to meet most of the metro area's needs for a long, long time, got vetoed. I think that was 1989. And that was the first big, really transformative event for Denver Water. And we limited our service area. We really just decided to focus on efficiency, find out how far we could get with conservation and reuse. And we really tried to be a better neighbor and get along better with our neighbors in our watersheds. And one thing I got involved a lot in was using the flexibility in our water system to add environmental and recreational benefits. And then another big event for us was the drought of 2002. Going into that, our planning was really focused on the concept of firm yield. We looked at the worst drought on record. We knew how much water we had. We had a limited service. We knew our build-out demand. We had projections that we had all the water we would ever need, and we really were wondering whether we needed a planning division anymore. And 2002 hit, and we had a year way drier than we'd ever seen before. Our storage dropped by 50% in less than a year. We never thought that was possible. It was quite shocking. Right in the middle of that, we had the biggest fire in the state's history centered right in the middle of our watershed. And we really got rattled. But another amazing thing that came out of that was our customers' response following the drought, and they really took conservation to heart. And we decided the world was really changing around us, and we needed to change with it. And we could no longer rely on the past as our sole guide to the future. We began taking a hard look at climate change predictions. And I personally got really lost in the science and finally decided that science wasn't going to give us the answer. The answer for us was to change our planning. And we could no longer do single projections of the future. We had to think about the way the world could unfold in many different ways and not just the current trends that we were seeing. And we could no longer have rigid plans. We needed plans that could adapt and change over time. So what I want to do is just kind of share the recipe that we designed to see if that might help you in your own situation in dealing with uncertainties about the future. One of our mottos was just keep it simple and keep it systematic. You know, once you stray away from the safety of the past as your guide, it's really scary out there, and there's a lot of projections and unknowns, and it can be quite overwhelming. And you have to find a way to keep it simple and practical. The way we did that, it was in 3 steps. We started off by doing just simple vulnerability assessments. What if this, what if that, particularly when it came to climate change. The one that always sticks in my mind is we just said, what if it was 2 degrees warmer in our watersheds? And we saw a potential of 20% decrease in our water supply because of that. That's just a shocking amount of loss of supply. That's a hugely disruptive event that we would have to deal with. The second step is to, like I said, plan for multiple futures. And we found that scenario planning fit our style quite well. It's simple. It doesn't require a lot of heavy-duty modeling. It's something that upper management can follow and really join in. Some of the things that really taught us is to focus on the things that are beyond our control. We don't control the future, and that's kind of a hard lesson for humans to learn. You know, and we can't predict the future either, and that's another really hard lesson for us to learn. And it took us a long, long time and to come to those realizations, and we really started thinking about the driving forces of change beyond our control that were really affecting our business in unexpected ways, and that could cause those unexpected things are the ones that really trip you up. And yesterday's lunchtime speaker talked about embracing the unexpected, and we had a similar motto, which is embrace uncertainty, and that's really where we needed to get to take this type of planning very seriously. The third step for us was to develop robust strategies. And so what do I mean by that? I think you've all heard about some of these ideas, but one of them is the low regrets idea. So what can you do now that sets you up for really a range of future conditions? The classic ones for us are just conservation and reuse. Push efficiencies. They tend to work in all future conditions. The next step is to develop and preserve options that you might need in the future. A simple example of that might be if you think you might need a water treatment plant but you're not sure, go out and buy the land today. That's a relatively cheap part of the project. It's a really important component. And if you don't need it, you can probably sell it for a good profit in the future. And then the third step is when you do develop projects, make sure that you build them incrementally, make sure that you build them just in time, and that you build them with flexibility. So the example of the water treatment plant again would be build it just to the size that you need for the near term, but be able to expand it, so make sure you don't overbuild it. And build in some capabilities to add treatment in case there are new contaminants that come along that you need to address. Some common robust strategies that I think work well across a lot of the water business are these really traditional ones that we talk a lot about, which is, you know, maximizing the supplies we have now, reuse, conservation, those kind of things. Storage often fits in there very well. Some of the other ones that I think we need to think more about are really investing in research and innovation. It's really pretty cheap, research is. And think how many times technology has bailed us out of some really difficult situations. Think how much more efficient your house is. Most people have replaced their old plumbing fixtures with things that are a lot more water efficient. They don't cost really any more than the old stuff did. And that's a lot of the success that our customers have had that Eric talked about in reducing their water use. You know, how about collaboration and what we're doing here, just learning together? That's so important. And I think building strong relationships, another thing we do at conferences like this. You know, a lot's changed since 1983 that Eric talked about, but the River District's still around, Denver Water's still around. And we still, I think we still agree that we need to work together, and that's in our best interests, and that's going to hold true long into the future. So those are really important, I think, robust strategies that we can do. You know, one thing that we applied in our thinking about relationships was always think about and. What is it that you want, and how can you get what the other side wants? And it's just amazing if you dig deep enough how many things you can actually accomplish that way. And that list of projects that Eric put together, I think, is a lot of those came out of that kind of thinking. So I want to close with just some thoughts on what I see as some robust strategies for the two basins that I spent my career working on, the South Platte and the Colorado River. You know, starting with the South Platte, what an amazing river. You know, it only gets 10% of the natural supply of the state's waters, augmented by 300,000 or so acre-feet of imported water from the Colorado River. But what does it do? It supplies 70% of our population, 70% of our economic growth. And the majority of our state's economic or agricultural economic output comes from the mighty South, the small but mighty South Platte. So it's a highly efficient river in terms of consumptive use. But I think there's more that we can do to squeeze out of that river. The key at this point, I think, in our evolution is we've all got to work together, and it's got to be the regional approach, and that's where we're gonna find the synergism. And I think the Colorado Water Plan really set us up well for that. The Colorado Water Plan, I think the Metro and the South Platte Roundtable felt like we were under siege at times from all the advice we were getting from around the state and all the concern from around the state. Well, what's the South Platte going to do? And it really brought us together as a basin. I think the time is right to really seize on that and to do some serious regional planning. We can reach higher levels of conservation. We can continue to lead the nation in conservation. We can continue to lead in expanding our reuse. We can fit in ATMs where they work, alternative transfers of ag water. There's still free river water to be had way down on the river in wet years. And there's the urban concepts of one water use that we can bring in. It's going to be hugely expensive. We're going to need lots of storage to make something like this work, to capture sporadic flows way down on the river. We're going to need big pipelines to pump water long distances uphill. And we're going to need advanced treatment to take a lot of the salt out of the water. So that's going to be a tough financial haul to do something like that. But what can we do now to get ready for that? Like I said, there's a lot of regional planning I think we can do to really take seriously, get going. What if that planning can show us where we might need to buy some land for facilities? It might teach us better how we can share resources that we have available across the region, and help us think about how maybe we could build a project incrementally and grow it as our needs might grow. And really, this sort of thinking, I think, is critical to the state because, you know, I think everybody in the South Platte doesn't want to export their problems to other parts of the state, and we really need to find a way to maximize the local resources that we have. Okay, switching gears to the Colorado River. I was involved in some of the development of the conceptual framework for the Trans-Basin projects. That was a tough process, but I think it was very helpful, and I think we learned a lot. For me, one of the really important outcomes was this, I think, a lot of recognition that we do need an insurance program in this state to protect our existing uses for compact curtailment. You think about it, almost all of a huge part of the state's economy, it really rides on us accomplishing that. Denver Water took leadership in one aspect of that, and that was to try to develop a demand management program for the Colorado River, and particularly the Upper Basin. A lot of people at the time said that it couldn't be done, and that the politics were just too difficult to ever do anything like that in the Upper Basin. And it was tough going, but today it is a very popular program, and we're learning an awful lot from that program. It's voluntary payments, mostly to agricultural users, for them to conserve water. We're doing it in a pilot program. We have a lot to learn. There's a lot to go to make that project really effective. I think some of the robust actions that we can take right now to move that project, that thinking along, is we really need to think about making that, instead of an emergency pilot program, think about making it an ongoing program. And think about how we can get some storage in Powell to store up the savings, and then use those savings when it's most strategically advantageous to the Upper Basin. And I think equally important now is to try to take advantage of other opportunities that the Upper Basin has, but these are also very politically difficult things, and that's getting ready for the renegotiation of the interim guidelines. That's the thing that controls the way Lake Powell's operated and how much water is released down to Lake Mead. And I think we have a good opportunity under the federal authorization language to carry over more water in Lake Powell. And that's something that could go a long way to buffer the what I think is most likely the inevitable shrinkage of supply that we're going to see from a warming climate. And the other opportunity is to continue to put pressure on the Lower Basin to reduce their overuse of the water, and try to get them closer to using their allocation under the compact. According to my calculations, probably that structural deficit that I'm talking about is somewhat equal to the deficit that we suffered in the last 15 years, which we now think is the worst drought in observed or recorded history. So that is really a big deal. And if we can have some wins on both of those areas, those can go a long way to helping offset climate change, and they can go a long way to reducing the need to do demand management in the program in the basin, and hopefully we can save demand management as something to really use for managing how we're going to respond to climate. The last comment I want to make is, the ace in the hole that people like to talk about on the Colorado River is the grand bargain. And that's the idea that the Upper Basin would cap its future development of water in trade for no compact call from the Lower Basin. I think that have a lot of promise, but I think one key thing to keep in mind is, to the extent that we really limit ourselves and constrain ourselves in our ability to develop more under the compact, we're essentially giving away that trading stock that we might have to do the grand bargain. And I think that's a good example of an option that we really need to strategically think about keeping open for the long term. So we hear a lot of talk at this conference about uncertainty, about the future and what to do about it. There's the old Yogi Berra quote that the future ain't what it used to be. And I kind of disagree with that in the sense that the uncertainty about the future has always been there. It's just that we are paying more attention to it, and we're really taking it to heart. I've been fortunate in my 31 years at Denver Water to have been at the crossroads of a lot of change and innovation, and really trying to work hard to address this uncertainty. And I would just encourage you to embrace that uncertainty and help think about building your own strategies, your own robust strategies to deal with the future. And I'll be watching from a distance. I'm not going away completely. I'm going to continue to work for the Front Range Water Council a little bit on some Colorado River issues. I've got some ideas for some water work that I might do if it doesn't get in the way of having too much fun. But I look forward to your success in the future and continuing the good work that you do. Thanks.
Thanks, Mark. We have time for questions, and I would say that this presents a rare and exciting opportunity for learning from these two gentlemen. So we'll open the floor to questions for either one of them. I can't see very well in the spotlights here, so you'll have to stand up so we can see you. Go ahead, Chris.
Colorado now has a water plan. I'm interested in both of your thoughts on where that water plan needs to go. The water plan pretty much covers everything right now. Where does the focus need to be in the future of the water plan or Colorado's execution and implementation of its water plan?
Eric, you want to take a shot at that?
Yeah, I think there needs to be sort of a refocus on what's in the plan. The plan is now, I'd say, almost 2 years old. We've had changes at the leadership of the Colorado Water Conservation Board. We're having changes. That board will always change as well. So I think we really do need to have a clear signal from the state, from the Department of Natural Resources, from the CWCB, from the governor's office to sort of recommit us to that plan. I think if we don't, we're going to find that the longer we go without really specifically getting into the plan, the more likely it's going to be like the plan from 1983. It'll sit on somebody's shelf, and somebody will pick it up 25 years from now and read from it and wonder why we didn't do it.
Yeah, do I need to turn this on, or you guys can turn it on? Is it off? All right, can you hear me? So what I think really we need to do with the water plan, I guess I'm just putting my simple engineering hat on, is think about the South Platte. 70% of the growth is going to be in the South Platte. It's only got 10% of the native supplies. We really need, I think, to put our energies into maximizing the resources we can get out of the South Platte, maximizing the resources we have there, and really focus on regional cooperation and regional projects. And I think the other big thing is we have a lot of opportunity right now to develop that insurance program I was talking about to cover existing uses of Colorado River water. I think it would be tremendous if the state could get behind those two activities.
Anyone else? Go ahead, Jim.
So what is this insurance plan? What would be the components of it? It sounds like So what are the components of this insurance plan? And it sounds like it might be the #1 action item in the water plan.
Well, let me just say the insurance plan was sort of the old nomenclature for what the plan now calls the collaborative process or project to avoid a future compact problems, compact deficits on the Colorado River. I think it specifically is point 4 of the framework. So insurance, we used to call it insurance. We sort of changed the name. So it really is the idea that we're going to be proactive in avoiding compact problems on the Colorado River.
Yes? Did that answer your question, Jim?
Well, well, let me just, I guess, summarize my thinking on that. we've got an awful lot to learn on the demand management program. You know, how can we cut demand in a way that doesn't cause economic disruption, doesn't cause impacts, you know, that we don't want to see to the rural economies and agriculture? How can we do it in ways that might help the environment? How can we store those savings and put them to best use? And I really think that has to be coupled with a strong program going into the renegotiation of the interim guideline, and keep chipping away at the structural deficit as our three-prong approach.
It's Jennifer Kimball.
Anyone else? Jennifer?
So Colorado has a plan, kind of, but Colorado's not the only state in the Upper Basin. How does Colorado, the state of Colorado and all of you, help your fellow basin states understand this insurance policy?
Well, the question, how do we help the other states of the upper division understand this insurance goal? I think they do. I think giving them credit, Utah has a very sophisticated plan. They've been doing this long before Colorado did. In part, we learned from what they do, that they understand that in the Colorado River system, what we're looking for in the future is certainty of supply for the major municipalities. Albuquerque now relies on San Juan Chama water. The Utah Front Range relies on Central Utah Project water and other exports out of the Duchesne Basin. So I do think they understand it, but Colorado is going to be in the same situation we were in the 1920s and the 1940s, is because we're the largest state, generate the most amount of water. We're going to have to be in the leadership role, and we're going to have to be very we're going to have to work with them and bring them along as partners. We're not going to be able to just push them or force them into that. They're going to have to come along willingly as partners.
Yeah, I would agree with that, and to the extent that Colorado has some commonality behind that insurance program, is working together, I think that's going to really help our position with the other three states. And as part of that leadership, I think a big role that the state of Colorado plays is to bring resources to that. Our AG's office and the CWCB and the technical expertise. We can really help bring along the analysis and technical and legal analysis that the Upper Basin needs to do.
John, how would you answer that?
I'm the moderator, Jennifer. You can't put me on the spot. I have another 15 years before I can match these guys, so. Anyone else?
Yeah.
Can't see. Okay,
Hello?
Bruce. Oh, the mics, I can't see out there. Go ahead.
All right. It
Kevin.
might be a similar question to what Bruce was going to ask. Welcome to the Yampa Basin. Kevin McBride, Upper Yampa Water Conservancy District, and I really appreciate that Denver and hopefully the Colorado Main Stem don't want to export problems to the other basins. And the Southwest and the Yampa also, being tributaries to the Colorado River, are impacted by all this. So when you talk about capping development, what do you mean, and what do you think that means to the basins that are less developed?
Mark?
What was the last part? What does it mean to the basins that
Are
Kevin
less
was-
developed.
Are less developed. Basins that are not part of the 70% but have real concerns about the expanded use that's going to come from climate change and whatnot. So how do the other basins that aren't the main stem and that aren't the South Platte have their voices in this conversation fully vetted?
Yeah, I'm not I don't want to be speaking for the Yampa Basin, if that's kind of where you're trying to lead me. But it's a fascinating question about capping future allocation. I mean, that would be a really important statewide discussion and about all the trade-offs. Eric, what are we're using the upper basins using maybe 4.5 out of 7.5? 4. There's a lot. I think there's a lot of there's room for more development in the Yampa Basin and a lot of capping of our future development that we could do. I think it's back to that and idea. So how can we get what everybody wants? And I think there is the opportunity in the grand bargain for more development, but also a substantial cap on development that hopefully would be enough of an enticement to reduce or limit compact curtailment.
Eric?
I agree. There's Bruce.
Okay. Bruce?
Great conversation, and I'm sure it'll continue for many years. And thanks to Kevin for bringing up, the future needs of the basin. Part of the insurance plan, or number 4, was to allow a reasonable amount of development for the West Slope as well, which includes Southwest Colorado and the Yampa and others, is where Kevin was going. My question really is probably directed more at Mark, something you said about the longer-term implementation of demand management, and we need to reduce our demands. But it appears through the SCPP that we've actually met that demand management through West Slope agriculture. So you're really looking at reduced demands from agriculture to meet the increase in demands for the urban Front Range. Would you like to comment on that?
Yeah, thank you, Bruce. I kind of expected you to ask me that question, and I forgot to talk about it. So, and I wanted to mention a reasonable development on the West Slope, but I thought somebody might point that out to me too. But, municipal conservation is already a highly developed industry. And it's very advanced. We know a lot about municipal conservation, and we're practicing a huge amount of municipal conservation. I think where the opportunities lie is to think about the drought restrictions that municipalities use in times of drought that are beyond the normal conservation. They're beyond efficiencies. How might those play a role, particularly if we have ability to store savings that can be had from municipalities? If there are some extraordinary conservation measures that municipalities could undertake, maybe those could be saved and stored as well under demand management program. And maybe there's opportunities to come up with alternative supplies to meet those municipal uses that would then count as savings as well under a demand management program that could be saved. But I don't think there's a lot to be more that we can do that isn't already being done on basic conservation. I think the idea is really how could we capitalize on maybe extraordinary conservation or drought restrictions or some kind of alternative supplies for municipalities to help out in their role in demand management.
Mark, is it the gap that's been identified really driven by domestic and urban demands on in plants? 500,000.
But isn't the gap that's been identified in the water plan that we're talking about implementing really driven by the growth of Colorado, primarily on the Front Range?
Yeah, absolutely. What is it? 80% of our growth is going to be on the Front Range. I mean, we're seeing this tremendous growth. I mean, I think everybody's experiencing it. The question is, can we continue? I think in my mind, can we continue to have it all and meet the water needs of that new growth and continue to have our agriculture and environment and recreation and all of those things. Yeah, I think that's in a way somewhat of a different problem than we're talking about for the insurance. I'm largely talking about insurance for existing water systems and that reasonable growth on the west slope. What do we do for all that new growth? I think is a very different answer, and that's where my thinking goes towards really trying to maximize the local resources that the South Platte has.
Well, I think that we've run out of time, folks. So join me in thanking these two gentlemen for their wisdom.